Implications 101, From Relationships to Stories to Understanding. In a previous video, I created Relationships 101, and I talked about the idea that while I'm only using two different loop structures to create all of the different relationship models that I build, in this particular presentation, I labeled the relationships based upon how they were, what the definition was, simply to clarify the understanding of the structures themselves, though I noted that if I was going to develop the relationship model to tell a story, this is not the way that I would label the loops. So I thought it probably best if I give you some examples of the way that I would label them if I was going to label the relationships to tell a story. Now, in this first one, the structure is about parents' trust, and a parent's trust of their child should enable the child's freedom, which should promote the desire on the part of the child to maintain those privileges of that freedom, which would encourage them to behave responsibly, which should further develop the parent's trust. And we have a virtuous reinforcing structure. And notice that the labels on the connections are not same or adds to or subtracts from or opposite, though they're labeled in such a way to help one understand the story of the loop itself. In the next one, this one is perpetuating poverty, so that the level of poverty diminishes the literacy rate, which tends to increase the level of unemployment, which further increases the level of poverty, and you have a vicious reinforcing structure, which simply causes the level of unemployment to increase and the level of poverty to increase over time. I also mentioned that balancing loops, goal-seeking loops, always have a goal, and they should be explicitly defined. There are instances where the goal of the balancing loop is implicit as opposed to explicit, and this is a loop which serves to stabilize reserves because the use of fossil fuel diminishes the fossil fuel reserves available, which increases the price of the fuel, which discourages the use of fossil fuels, so that this loop itself tends to stabilize the use, though there are multiple other relationships for whatever this loop is part of. I mean, seldom do you end up with structures that are just this simple and there aren't any other relationships as part of it, so that there's other things driving the use of the fossil fuel and the amount of reserves available and the price of the fuel. But this is just a simple loop to explain the way that I would label this to tell a story. In this loop, which also has an implicit goal to stagnate student behavior, so that the quality of the student behavior tends to increase the teacher expectation. And with that increase in expectation, it tends to diminish the likelihood that the teacher will engage with the student and offer praise, which then discourages the quality of student behavior, which then diminishes the teacher expectation, and you have a loop which tends to stagnate the student behavior. It doesn't continue to advance the way that it should. As a more complex example, consider I'm thinking about population growth and population as individuals get older. After some delay, they have, the females at least, provide births which add to the population, and I have a population growth reinforcing structure. At the same time, the population ages and I have deaths which tend to diminish the population, so that this is a stabilizing structure. The reinforcing structure is dominant, so that the population will continue to grow. There are more births than deaths typically, so that while this loop stabilizes, it doesn't actually diminish the population, which is why I call it population stabilizing as opposed to population decline. In addition to this, the population tends to diminish the number of resources per person, diminishing the life expectancy, which tends to increase the desired family size, which increases the births per person, which increases births, which causes the population to grow further. And what I end up with here is a vicious reinforcing structure, which actually makes the situation worse as the way that it's developing. And the last structure that I added is, because the life expectancy is declining, it increases deaths, which further diminishes the population. Thus, diminishing the population increases the resources per person, therefore extending the life expectancy, and you have a population stabilization loop. Now, notice in this structure, I didn't actually label any of the relationships, and the reason being is that when I get to more and more complex structures, it becomes difficult and sometimes confusing, because even in this structure, there is one set of relationships that drives this in one direction, and another set of the other part of the structure drives it in the opposite direction, so that I would need two labels on this and have to explain to a person why one label went with one loop and one label went with the other loop, and it gets really confusing. One of the real nice aspects of Kumu is that if I send someone access to the project itself and develop one of these structures to tell a story, I can go ahead and document the loop itself and actually describe that set of relationships. And if I build this in and mouse over this, it brings that particular loop to the front so that they don't see it in the midst. It sort of separates it out from all of the stuff in the background that's not part of the focus at the moment. So that once I finish this, I can then say, okay, let me go ahead and read about this loop. And this is the reason that we sequence the loops in a single sequence, whether they're reinforcing or balancing, so a person understands what order to read the story in, so that it's R1, B2, R3, B4. So this is a description of this particular loop, the stabilizing loop, and then I can go back and say, all right, I want to read this one, and this has in so that it brings that particular loop to the forefront, and I can read the description of this set of relationships and then move on to the next one and read this set of relationships. And I could actually build this in Kumu so that in the midst of here there would be a link that would click and take me to the next loop in the sequence, so one didn't have to go back over here. They could just go ahead and stay over here. I personally use these so that I unfold them in Kumu in a presentation rather in the project, and I do the voiceover the way that you're listening to it at the moment. Now, in where this project, or where the video is for this particular project, whether in YouTube, look in the notes section of the video, in wherever else I might post it, there's a context link which will take you to a focus point in the Perspectives project. It will show you that Implications 101 is here, which is related to Relationships 101, and the next one I'll be doing is Storytelling 101. This is a part of a much larger environment, and if you go to focus and say that you want indirect, you can continue to expand this environment to look at additional projects that are related to the one that was initially focused. So hope you found this of some interest, and I'll have another video about Storytelling 101 probably tomorrow. So take care. Bye.